It was in the media when the Greeks were out in the street protesting, when they had those massive protests, and the parallels to the Argentine crisis of 2001 were drawn back then. Since then, it's faded into the background to a certain extent, even though it comes up occasionally. There are many linkages, or there are quite a few similarities. An unsustainable debt buildup under monetary and exchange rate policy conditions that place very sort of limited options on governments as far as what policies they can implement, and eventually the IMF stepping in and making matters worse until everything blows up. Clearly things haven't gotten quite that far here, but it seems they are going down the same road. High debt, growing exponentially, IMF austerity measures, which inevitably make matters worse, and so it just doesn't add up. Okay. And that has happened many places. Argentina is certainly a dramatic example, but not the only one. I know there's a very strong public opinion against the IMF, for the IMF's participation in the Argentine build-up to the crisis and the crisis itself. So whenever they see or hear that the IMF is in Greece or in Portugal or in Spain, they say they know those countries are doomed because of Argentina's experience. So that Argentines have learned well regarding sort of the role the IMF plays and the interests it defends and who wins and who loses. It's very clear. It's always the lazy Southerners who spend beyond their means, who borrowed too much and now have a problem repaying, kind of deal with it, is what the IMF has said and what creditors in Wall Street and banks, etc. Now, if you're a bank and you're making a loan at 80% interest rate, or a very high interest rate, higher than the average to a country, you know that that's a risky loan because of the interest rate you're paying. I mean, the interest rate has a risk premium built into it. And so clearly, if the risk is high that you won't get your money back, then that is a part of the capitalist game. You take risks, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. And if you lose, deal with it, because that's the way capitalism works. But somehow it seems that in this financialized capitalism, the creditors never lose. It's only the debtors who are the ones that permanently lose. So somehow the rules of capitalism, as it were, have gotten mixed up because risk basically has no consequences.
Do you have any advice for like campaigners here in the North who are working on the debt issue? What would be your advice to them?
Well, I would say one is to read about experiences in the third world, in the South, because this has happened already. The advice would be to learn what has happened, and the second is to try to cut the process off before it gets to its worst point, which is what Argentina did not do. Argentina dragged it to the worst possible moment, and then everything blew up in the worst possible way. Had Argentina defaulted 4 years earlier, then the situation would have been very different. So I think that is sort of learning, acting as soon as possible, and building networks of solidarity. I think that's also key, because inevitably the crisis, from what we are seeing already, brings high unemployment rates and dislocations that produce a lot of hardship for a lot of working people.